Hi, Jake. Welcome to Resonant Essentials, the group. How are you doing today?
Great. Thanks, Michelle. Thanks so much for having me.
So, I am so excited to do this interview because, as you know, I'm taking your classes in grant writing. And I wanted to give the group, because there's some people who are nonprofits that are here in the group, and I wanted to give them a chance to get to know you like I've gotten to know you. So, welcome.
Thank you.
And for anybody who's watching, please, if you have any questions for Jake, put them in the comment section. While I can't see it right away, I will be going back and forth between the Zoom and into the questions so that we can get your questions answered. So, Jake, I found you by LinkedIn, through LinkedIn, and we connected. And we talked about your services. And that's when I knew this guy really knows what he's talking about. So tell everybody a little bit about your background, how you got in. I found this a fascinating story. Tell everybody how you got into grant writing, because that's not what your degree is in, is writing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes, sure. Absolutely. So really what got me into the whole nonprofit space was probably 5-6 years ago, when I was finishing up my education, finishing up my degree. I started working with this local nonprofit here in Wisconsin, which, many of you can probably tell by my accent. That's where I'm based. So started working with this local community-based nonprofit here in Wisconsin. And we worked a lot with individuals with disabilities and autism. We had a day program and really focused a lot on vocational skills, life skills, social skills, for those individuals after they graduated high school. At least in our area, there weren't a whole lot of options for that population after graduating. So that was really our focus. I started, helping out with some accounting, some social media stuff. But I always really liked writing. And so we had this grant that through our local United Way that we wanted to apply to. And the executive director at the time asked if I would write the grant. It was a pretty simple application. Wrote it, applied to it, and ended up receiving that grant. And that's what really ignited an interest in grant writing and how do you use your ability to write to tell a compelling and persuasive story to secure funding for your mission. So that's really how it started. I worked side by side with their first executive director for about a year before she left the organization, and I became the second executive director of the organization. I was 22 or 23 at the time, and
Wow, that's
yeah,
what I find fascinating.
huge learning curve there, and there were definitely some challenges, but with our grants and fundraising initiatives, we were quite successful. Which eventually prompted me to take the one piece of that job that I enjoyed most, which was writing grants, and shift career paths to doing that full time and starting my consultancy.
Well, little do people know that I used to be the financial director for the American Diabetes Association. Oh, quite a few years back, I'll say that. And it's not an easy job, and it's changed. The ground that you walk on is not like the ground you walked on back then. It's a whole new ballgame with grant writing, isn't it?
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
struggled. Go ahead.
No, it's one of those things where a lot of times, just think of how many nonprofits are in our communities, and the the ratio of grant seekers to grant makers, you know, can be a very saturated and competitive landscape, trying to secure grants. Yeah.
Well, and I have to say, one of the things that led me to was that because I have a nonprofit with the center, which is, we're an incubator for spiritually based businesses. And I struggled with how to find grants. So you were so instrumental in taking your classes, but I want you to tell people, how do they find grants?
Sure, sure. Yeah, it's, you know, there's so many different opportunities out there. It's easy to, you know, and I'm subscribed to a number of email lists and things, and I am constantly inundated with opportunities. But you know, how do you select the best fits for your organization, for your mission, is really, I mean, that's half the battle. You know, so if you're running some sort of, you know, like yours, a spiritually based nonprofit, in New Mexico, you know, you'd want to look for foundations or funding agencies who have historically given to organizations in New Mexico, who have historically given to organizations who do similar work to you. You know, and a lot of times I see where an organization like that might apply to maybe a foundation based in California who gives grants to agriculture nonprofits.
Yeah, they
Um,
didn't like me too much.
so yeah, it's, you know, how do you identify those opportunities that are really the lowest hanging fruit for your mission? And that's one thing that we really help with. But just to give you sort of an idea or a sense of that, you know, number one, select opportunities within your geographic area. So there's lots of local foundations in New Mexico. A lot of times a simple Google search will suffice to locate some of those opportunities. If you were to just search local or New Mexico state grants, or whatever state you happen to be in, or primarily operate in. And then from there, once you locate a couple of those opportunities, take a look. A lot of times on their websites, they'll tell you what their values are, what their mission is, what their objectives are. And if when you're reading those values and objectives, and you feel like they resonate with what you're doing, there's a good chance that that might be a good fit. There's a number of resources, free resources and search engines out there as well. The Grantsmanship Center is one that we talk about in the trainings. That's a totally free resource. There's Wells Fargo and JP Morgan are both financial institutions who administer a number of foundations and charitable trusts. So you can look on their sites, and those are totally free to access, for local foundations in your area. And then just one last thing on this. You can also look at Foundations 990. So if you've identified maybe a couple foundations, you look up their 990. It's totally free to do that. And these 990s have to be made publicly available,
Taking notes with the red pen.
Awesome, awesome. But if you look at their 990, that's their tax filing, and you can actually look and see what organizations they gave to over the previous year, where those organizations were located, and how much money they gave to those organizations. That really helps you get a sense of, one, where those funders give money historically, and two, what types of organizations they like to fund.
Well, you know, that's one of the hard things is I've eliminated more than I have put to the good side. So
Yeah.
process of elimination, but it takes an awfully long time. And I know that that's part of the process because you have to narrow the field down. But there's a lot more to the grant writing process that I struggled with overwhelming odds with. Here I've got the foundation. I can write the story, a compelling story. But there's so much more than just the story because they ask you for things that you're going, how do I answer this? So how long does the grant process, the writing process generally take? And tell us a little bit more about what makes it. Do you, like, if you had me, you were doing my grants and you came across a grant that was perfect for me while you were looking for somebody else's. So you earmark it, go to Michelle, blah, blah, blah. What process would you use to make that? Would you have like a set panel of information that you just pull from? Or how do you do the miraculous 20 pages of crap that you can come up with? And
Yes.
important.
Yes. That's a great question. So yes, you're exactly right. Step one is always research and identify those opportunities that are in alignment with your specific mission and your goals. And that really, once you identify maybe 5 to 10 of those over the next 6 to 12 months, that really provides you a solid starting point and strategy going forward of okay, which grants do we apply to, and maybe which ones are most worth our investment of time and resources. Typically after that, what our process is we either do the research or the client will do the research and identify those funding opportunities, and will work with us to compose and develop each section of that proposal. So once those opportunities are identified, what we do is we will review the guidelines and eligibility requirements thoroughly. We'll make sure that it's actually a good fit for the client. There have been some cases where maybe a client has sent us a grant opportunity, and when we take a little bit of a deeper look at it, we identify that maybe it's not the best fit, or maybe there was something in the eligibility requirements that maybe the organization didn't meet. We'll typically work with the client to find maybe a better opportunity or a better fit that we can pursue at that point in time. Following that, we'll typically develop a project plan and a plan for where that funding would be allocated. So if this would go towards general operating support, or maybe capital funding if an organization is looking to purchase a new building or renovate a building, or if it would be funding allocated to supporting a specific project or initiative that the organization is looking to support. So we'd want to get that plan developed pretty early in the stages of a given project. And from there, we start to develop the narrative. So the narrative really being the body of your grant proposal, which can comprise several different components, objectives, intended outcomes. We'll usually source different data that speaks to the specific problem in your community that your organization is addressing. And how specifically what solutions your organization is proposing to address those needs in your community. And then, of course, any required attachments, budgets, we work pretty closely with clients to develop the budget for the grant funded project. And then we'd
not
make,
what I like to do.
yes. So one thing with our clients is we really do our best to respect their time. We know I used to be a nonprofit executive. I know that time is not always a resource that is readily available. So typically what we do, how we work is as we're developing a proposal for a client, any sort of questions or needs that we have, we develop a list of needs pretty early on in the project. And we try to only communicate that via email once in the early stages of the project, what any of our needs would be. And we might have a follow-up meeting to discuss any of those needs. Of course, there might be occasional questions that come up throughout the process, but we really do our best to respect our clients and their staff's time.
Well, I'm gonna have questions for you at the end of this, so keep going.
Okay. So once we have all those components developed and for our grant proposal, we'll typically send it to the client to review. If they have any revisions, we always want to make sure that we are representing and reflecting the goals, values, missions of our clients. So we always seek approval, feedback, and any modifications or revisions that the client deems appropriate, we then integrate back into the proposal prior to submission of that proposal. So that's sort of our process. As far as timeline, if you're looking to write grants yourself, just keep in mind some of the time requirements. So your typical foundation grant would typically take anywhere from 20 to 50 hours. Those are the least intensive. And they can take less. They can take less. Walmart Foundation is an example I use, and they give grants, and it takes their application. There's hardly anything. It takes maybe 5 minutes to fill it out. But your typical foundation is typically in the 20 to 50 hour range. State government grants, those are typically in response to an RFP, a request for proposals. And there's, multiple components to those. Those are typically 60 to 80 hours. So any state government agencies, federal agencies, so, your USDA, Department of Education, what else? National Science Foundation, any of those federal agencies, those are much more robust applications and much more time intensive. And they'll typically take 120 to 200 plus hours to develop those proposals. For those, we like to have a few months to really develop competitive proposals in response to federal funding.
I've been making notes on this while you're going because
Go for it.
Okay, one of my questions is, as a grant writer, you said Walmart Foundation, and they have less restrictive. I've noticed when I've been on my path of searching that it can be $750 grant up to, 750,000 and million, a few million. There a starting point for if I came to you as a client and I said, I want you to do my grant writing for the next year. Mm-hmm. Is there a starting point? Do you say, okay, I'm only going to look at my company. We have all the resources, we have all the time, but we don't do grants under $1,000, or is there a starting point financially?
Sure. Typically we won't pursue anything that's under 15 to 20,000. That's typically where we start, and then we'll look at any opportunities from that number and above. and they vary so much. So I mean, foundations, they can be anywhere from 1,000, like you said, all the way up into the millions. Um, state state are typically in the tens to hundreds of thousands, and federal is almost always, hundreds of thousands to millions. Um, but foundations, especially for newer organizations, less established, always recommend starting with foundations. They're the least time intensive. They're less strict on requirements. So for, just as an example, with federal grants, they typically like to see an organization that's been in operation for at least 3 years.
Right.
So we typically, foundations, they're a much better fit, and typically result, at least for a newer organization, result in more success.
If the nonprofit's been in existence for 3 years, is there a minimum? Like I noticed on a few grants that there's a minimum they had to have received X amount of funding from other resources.
Mm.
That's one of the eligibility requirements is the amount of money you've already received in eligibility. So is that to kind of put people like the newbies on the block, where they're not fully established, to make sure that their money is going to a company or a nonprofit that's actually doing the work they say they're doing? Is that a deciding factor or a elimination factor to kind of get rid of us riffraff?
That's an excellent question. That's an excellent question. So with a lot of federal grants, not all of them, but I'd say maybe half of them, there's that matching requirement. So the organization has to match a certain amount of funding to what that federal agency would grant or award. However, it doesn't have to be only cash. And this is one way you can get creative. It can also, cash contributions are good. So if you want to allocate some of your, maybe donations or part of your general operating fund to that specific grant. But you can also, if you have volunteers, you can include volunteer hours. And volunteer hours, I think they update the value of a volunteer hour every year.
You can buy me a grant for $1 million. I have definitely done volunteer hours.
Yes. So I think now they value one volunteer hour at $29. So
Y'all can get there.
so take, however many volunteers you have, however many hours they're volunteering, multiply it by that number, and you'd have to look at what the updated number is, and you can do that at Independent Sector. That's a free resource, Independent Sector, and they keep up-to-date reports on the value of volunteer time. But that's one thing you can include in that match. And you can also, any donated goods. So the value of any donated goods, or the value of any of your tangible items, so maybe building or utilities. If you are, and this is getting into the weeds a little bit, but to run a project, there's always those overhead expenses. The lights are on, the air conditioning or the heating. If the grant isn't going to cover that, you can allocate a certain percentage of those costs if you need to get the match dollars up.
Which leads me to my next question.
All right.
So here's my next question. I'm kind of It's kind of hot in my house. I've got the air conditioner on, but it hasn't been on all day, so I apologize. I'm sticking to the chair. Very uncomfortable place to be. Does when you're working with somebody like me in a nonprofit situation, and I have a layout of a budget. Okay, so I have this laid out. I just have to plug numbers in and it starts allocating and doing things. That was donated to me by someone who shall remain nameless because she's a sweetheart. And I already had the program in. So does that requirement, do you help work with the client to develop their budget for each grant? Or would the budget go standardized? Like if I'm looking for an administrator, I want funding to hire staff. That would be one grant for one thing. And then one of the programs I want is a business module brought in for the practitioners to help them develop their businesses. A lot of people in a spiritually based business don't do business practices. It's a little overwhelming. So they're everything. So would you be the person that would say, okay, for this administrative person that you want to hire, this is how you do this budget, but for this, it would be like this? Or can you cross them over and do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, for grant proposals, there's always, you want to have a project specific budget. So as a nonprofit or a business or an organization, you'll have your general operating budget, and that's going to be the same across the span of your fiscal year. But with each grant proposal, you want to develop a project specific budget that speaks to how those grant funds will be utilized. And that's something that we help our clients with.
Okay.
A lot of times we'll work with them and determine what those funds will be used for and how we can sort of lay out that budget for that specific project. We also have resources available on our website, chaseconsultingsolutions.com, where we have templates that you can utilize, for developing a budget or a logic model or a business plan. All of those resources are available on our website. If it's something you want to do yourself, those resources are there. But it's something too, if you are a client of ours, that we walk you through that and take most of it off your plate.
Which leads me to the next question, and one that's coming from the group itself. How much does it cost to hire you? Do you do by grant, or do you do an annual? Do you do an annual charge, like $100 a year? That would be so nice.
Yeah.
So I know I just had to make up a number. And so while we're talking, so is it both? But also, can you write a grant to fund the grant writing?
Great questions. So
I'm on a roll today.
Yes, you are. Yes, you are. Wouldn't expect anything less, Michelle. So yeah, we bill all of our services by project. And I'd be happy, anyone who's interested, I'd be happy to send you a pricing guide that outlines our services. But we like our clients to be in control of how much they spend. And they're really the ones in control of that. So if you engage us to write a proposal for you, whether it's a foundation grant or a state government or a federal, you know exactly what it's going to cost before you ask us to do it. And
So let me get away with $100 for a year's worth of your work.
we're working on the logistics of that.
Okay, there you go.
Um, but yes, and everything, all of our services are billed upon completion and delivery of that project. So we don't ask for anything upfront. We don't ask for half upfront, half on completion. We bill at completion. So once that project is completed and we integrate all of your suggested edits, um, that's that's
And
when
that's
you
regardless whether they receive the grant or not.
that's correct. Yep, yep, that's correct.
So that comes to my next question,
Sure.
fiscal sponsorship. Can
Mm,
you speak to that? Because I do know there's some, I'll give you my example because I was very sad, very sad. In high school, I knew a guy who actually grew up, he reached out about 2-3 years ago and touched base with me out of the clear blue. And he told me he was a fiscal sponsor and he helped people get grants.
mm,
And I thought, well, that's marvelous for a first time kind of homeowner, home buyer program. I mean, for grant writing, because you're starting your nonprofit, it's hard to get started funded.
mm.
Um, but those can be a little sticky too. Can you speak to those situations and do you or do you not do those?
Sure, sure. So, and again, a great question. So we do work with clients who are set up through a fiscal sponsorship. Um, I think, there's pros and cons to everything. I think, there are some benefits to fiscal sponsorship. Um, However, and this is just from my experience, I think fiscal sponsorships are really a short-term solution. I think if you plan on operating your nonprofit over the long term, um, register for your own 501(c)(3), and create your own nonprofit entity. Um,
But if you
you
have
know,
one already, can do they
right.
oh, do they still cover that if you're already a 501(c)(3)?
Yeah, if you're already a 501(c)(3), there's no need for a fiscal sponsor. Um, it's for typically it's for organizations who don't have that registration. Um, but but by utilizing the fiscal sponsorship, you're then able to apply for grants through the fiscal sponsorship. However, with a fiscal sponsor, they typically take a percentage of your grants. Um, and it varies, it could be 10% of the grants. Um, with, so like we don't take any, we're not a fiscal sponsor, but the grants that we win are the organizations. We don't take any sort of commission on anything. Um, and that's just, they're the Grant Professionals Association, which is really our professional playbook in our industry, um, advises against any grant writers or firms from accepting a commission on any awarded grants.
Because
Um,
that could really muddy the waters, correct?
yeah, yeah, and yeah, so it's just, and there are some companies who do that, or if you're set up with a fiscal sponsor, that would typically be what that arrangement would look like. But it's not how we choose to conduct business.
Okay, so we've talked about a lot of things. We've talked about a lot of what you do. Is there something that we missed out on what services you provide? Because I know that you can break your you mentioned to me one time, well, we can do this for you, and we can do that, and we can do this and that. So you kind of, I could cherry pick what I needed from
Yes, absolutely. Um, you know, we have a lot of different services, but we really tailor our approach to the specific needs of the client. You know, so we do grant research, if our client is interested in that. And what that looks like is we put together what's called a funding opportunity matrix, which is really a comprehensive assessment of currently available grant opportunities across the next 6 to 12 months. And that's based on your geographic scope, the foundation or funding agency's alignment with your mission and goals, intended uses of funds. So we typically put together a database of 15 to 20 grant opportunities that clients can use as a solid starting point, for seeking funding.
How much does something like that cost?
Sure. So for that, that's 2,500 for that.
Okay.
And that's typically a 2 to 3 week project to develop that database. And then we of course offer the grant writing, you know, so your full service proposal composition services. And we have, you know, a great network and a great team of writers and consultants that we work with based on their specific expertise. So whether it's education or agriculture or a spiritual organization, you know, we have access to different writers that we're able to deploy strategically based on your specific needs.
One.
So, and then we do the grant reviewing as well. So maybe for a client who wants to write the grants themselves, you know, what we will do if they want an objective feedback on their proposal, we create a scoring guide and a rubric based on the evaluation criteria of that specific grant. It's really like having a review panel review your application before it goes to the real review panel. And we'll score your proposal objectively, offer feedback to help you strengthen your proposal.
How much does that one cost?
Yeah, so that varies by the type of grant. So whether it's a foundation, state government, or federal. And again, anyone, you know, don't hesitate to reach out. You can reach out on our website, or you can email me directly, and I'd be happy to send you more information on that.
Or they can reach out to me.
Yes.
Forget how to reach you, because we're going to get to your contact information here in a little bit.
Okay.
They can also message the thread, which I probably am not going to see because I'm not a real good on Facebook, but you can send me a message through Messenger so I can get you in touch with Jake.
Awesome. And then the last one we do is our training and workshops. So we offer professional development opportunities, like Michelle had mentioned, for people who are maybe new to grant writing, don't know where to start, maybe new to nonprofits. It's a 7-hour training, very comprehensive. And we have a few cohorts coming up of that, and we have one starting in June, July, one in August, and one in September. So we've got information on our website about that, or if you're interested in registering, it's you know, it's by industry standards, it's very affordable and cost effective. So
I have to say, and don't forget to mention that you do a 1 hour go slow because little old lady doesn't think so well, or whatever you want to say. But you offer the once a month course as well. So you have the best paced course. So what if Resonant Essentials wanted you to do one for everybody who's interested in learning this, and do one for us at the center? Would that be feasible for you to do a faster pace so we can get people on board that may want to take this faster paced 7-hour. So and I say this because if you've got all these people coming from different places, if we were all in New Mexico and we were coming in strategically for New Mexico, it could be geared a little better that way. I would, I may be wrong, but you could make it more specific toward our needs and how to write the grants.
Absolutely, absolutely. And yes, I'd be more than happy to offer that. I'd be happy to offer a separate cohort just for New Mexico-based nonprofits or individuals who are interested. So typically, so again, it's a 7-hour training, and we typically offer it for $350, and that's not per course, that's for the entire series. And they're all an hour-long session. And you receive copies of the slides following each that you're welcome to use as a reference. They're very detailed, as I'm sure Michelle can speak to. And then at the end, you'll receive a certificate of completion for completing the series. But one other thing we do offer to groups is if we have at least 20 registrants, we'll offer it for only $300. So we'll take $50 off of each person's registration. Yeah, so if you are interested in that, spread the word. And if we can get at least 20, I'd be happy to offer that at that discounted registration.
Okay. Well, we'll see what we can pull together. And the 7-hour comprehensive, the faster pace, is that done in a period of 2 days, 5 days, 1 day?
Sure. So what we do is well, at least for the 3 we have coming up, they're going to be Wednesday and Friday mornings for what is that, 4 weeks. So we'll have a Wednesday, Friday, Wednesday, Friday, Wednesday, Friday, Wednesday. So it'll be mornings.
Okay. That's good to know. Thank you. You're really unique. I know this because I have talked to grant writers before I found you and found you and went, oh my gosh, thank God somebody speaks Michelle, which is wonderful because sometimes it's a little ADHD and I get a little distracted and you're still able to bear with me. So I appreciate that and thank you for it. But there's other things that would set you apart. So can you speak to the typical grant writing and what you guys are doing? Because you put together a different type of company for grant writing.
Yeah, thank you. And yes, the ADHD thing, I think that just must be a thing with business owners because I find that all the time. It's like, yeah, no. So I'm more than happy, and we're definitely on the same page there. But yeah, a lot of grant writers. A lot of times you're getting one writer who maybe has a narrow focus. They have their specific path and their specific experience. And I think a lot of times that's great if this individual is someone who really fits into your organization and your mission and your goals. But one thing that really does set us apart is our network of writers and consultants. And I'm incredibly proud of the team we've put together. And they really offer a robust combined experience of, nearly 3 decades with our team in all different areas of expertise, from grant writing to nonprofits to education consulting, and have successfully secured about 6.57 million in grant funding, from private foundations to state government agencies to federal agencies. And again, we're really able to tap into their unique expertise and strategically deploy those writers and consultants based on the specific needs, goals, and priorities of the client. So yeah, it's, each client and project is unique, and really does require that tailored approach. And even, within the same client, you're going to have different projects and different initiatives, and you're going to require, different skills and expertise, to really ensure the best chances of success. So that's really, I think, what sets us apart from other grant writers, and other consultants.
Well, in commending you, I've taken your Saturday once a month classes and I advertise them all the time in Resonant Essentials. I think this month are we in week module 3 or 4?
I think 4. Yeah.
And that module is refresh my memory. I just did the newsletter, so I've got everybody's information of all their events going on. I'm sending it out letter. But what is it that we're doing in module 4?
Yeah, in 4 we talk all about budgets. So grant budgets, what all of, so right up your alley, Michelle.
You know what? I have to say I was the only affiliate to balance to the penny with their audit, and I hated my job.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about all of those components that go within a grant budget. I'll walk you through each of those sections, from personnel, equipment, supplies, how equipment and supplies are different, some very nuanced things when it comes to grant budgets. But I'll walk you through each step of developing that budget. And yeah, so it'll looking forward to it. It's one thing I think that give people the most trouble. Narratives and writing a compelling story, a lot of times that can be so easy, speaking from the heart, and telling your story and how your organization is making an impact. But budgets can trip people up. And they definitely tripped me up in the beginning. So yeah, this'll be a really good one.
It is. I did my own books for years. I did all this for my own. I had another business prior to Resonant Essentials, and Resonant Essentials Esoteric School of Metaphysics. And I realized that one of the hardest things for people is to deal with looking at the realities of their money.
Mm-hmm.
And understanding, so you can't ignore the utility bill when it comes in the mail just because you think you don't have enough money, because you don't know, and unless you're really working toward doing this. So in a budget, it is very time consuming, but it is also, once you get the methodology down, pretty easy because you can just allocate.
Absolutely right. Yeah.
So I get it. I don't like doing it, but I get it.
Yeah.
So we're getting kind of close to, we've been on almost an hour, but that's okay, because I feel like this kind of work is really important for people to understand the differences with grant writers and their capabilities. How can somebody get in touch with you if they don't want to go through me, which is fine. Happy either way. But somebody may be watching this and not know who I am. This is going on YouTube for people to rewatch, but how can people get in touch with you directly?
Sure. So yeah, I would invite anyone to visit our website, www.chaseconsultingsolutions.com. There, we've got lots of information there that you can, read about our services, our approach, what makes us different. Um, and you can schedule an appointment right on our website. If you go to our contact page, you can either submit a contact form, or if you scroll down a little bit, there's a link where you can schedule an appointment with me. Um, totally free to have a chat with me. So you're welcome to do that, or you can email me directly. You can do that on our website. My direct email is posted on our website. It's jchase.ccs.llc@gmail.com. And you're welcome to reach out at any time.
Well, I got to tell you, you folks better take advantage of contacting him and getting him to talk to you one-on-one, because this man is going to get so incredibly busy that he'll be hiring somebody to be a mini him. So I highly suggest, if you have questions, reaching out to Jake. He's a fountain of information, has lots of patience, and give you a plethora of information. If you have a question before we end, go ahead. I'm leaving there. Oh, you're welcome. Tell us. If you have a question, we'll give you a couple of minutes to post a question. And if not, then that's okay too. You can contact him directly, like he said. But Jake, it's such a pleasure working with you. I look forward to our Saturday morning classes. Even though I can't keep track whether I've signed up or not. I have been crazy busy. We just came back from busy. I'm looking to start a program that addresses the needs of 18 to 25-year-olds adversely affected with COVID through wellness or healing arts, through the healing arts. So we've got a few irons in the fire. It's glad to know that I can come back to you. Oh, one other question. I don't know what I wanted to ask you. So a lot of times you have to send off your letter of interest to these foundations, and they say, okay, send off the letter of interest. Once you get the letter of interest, you and you're approved, like to submit an actual grant application. Do you recommend that people send off their own letter of interest, or is that an additional fee, or is that just that included in the grant proposal writing? How do you work with that one?
Sure. That's a great question. So yeah, you're right. Sometimes there will be a letter of interest or a letter of intent or letter of inquiry. They've all got different fancy names that they like to use to confuse us. But yeah, we do recommend that the letter of inquiry or letter of intent come from the organization. We do offer that. We're able to at least draft your letter of inquiry or letter of intent. It's a and I'd have to look at what it is, but it's very nominal, what it is to draft the letter of intent. Or we do grant coaching as well. So a lot of times that's just a one-on-one conversation with me, and if you just want me to coach you through it, I'm happy to do that too. But yeah, that is another service that we offer.
Yeah, I'm getting ready to submit one. I've got some finishing up to do. A woman that works with me in the office, Sunny, she's a doll. She's really kind of helping with that letter of interest. I'm trying to see if I can get funded to hire people.
Yeah.
If I can get funded to hire people, then I can get people to work with you, and I can step back into the board member position.
Yep.
And do my work. So yes, I'm looking very forward to all of this. Jake, thank you so much. Yeah, everybody, if you want to see this is going to be on the Resonant Essentials, the group. Please share it out to people that you think might be interested, or you can go to our YouTube channel at Resonant Essentials. You can get it there. I will be uploading it tomorrow. Jake, thank you so much. I just greatly appreciate you giving me your time, your expertise, and your patience all through this process that I'm going through.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, Michelle. You know, really, really honored and humbled that you invited me to be a part of this conversation today. And I'm happy to share information. I believe in making knowledge accessible to people, and empowering them to, you know, have the resources to support the work that they're doing. So I really appreciate you taking the time to schedule this time today.
Thank you. We will see you soon, in a couple of weeks, or maybe sooner if I decide to go the fast-paced one, so that I'm not, so I can get more under my belt.
Sounds great. Sounds great.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Michelle. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Bye for now.